Hi guys, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now today's guest is a good friend and someone I've wanted to get on the show since day one. Described as the real-life Indiana Jones, Niall McCann is a TV presenter, an explorer and a biologist. Niall has travelled the planet on biological expeditions to some of the most remote parts of the globe and joins the show today to discuss his role as Director of Conservation for National Park Rescue. Now, National Park Rescue is a direct action conservation organisation that focuses on the prevention of the slaughter of elephants, rhinos and lions in sub-Saharan Africa. They rescue dying national parks to protect nature, alleviate poverty and also tackle poaching. In this engaging and wide-ranging discussion recorded in front of a live audience, we discuss his work to establish National Park Rescue from the ground up. How do you identify failing national parks and approach to help them? How do you fund such work into the future and what difference is their innovative approach making? Now, Niall shares his career journey and also advice for people like you looking to perhaps follow in his footsteps. It's a must-listen episode. As always, enjoy.
Sure, I'm Niall McCann, or Dr Niall McCann to my mum. I'm Director of Conservation for National Park Rescue. I'm a National Geographic explorer. I'm an occasional broadcaster, and I'm a general outdoor enthusiast.
You're a man who wears so many different hats. You don't know which one to put on at any one time. Yeah, well, thank you and welcome to Conservation Careers podcast. It's great to have you on. You've been on my hit list for many a year, actually, so I'm really kind of pleased to kind of properly connect and carve out this precious hour we have to kind of talk about your work, your career and everything else that's going on. So welcome, Niall. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Let's start talking. We're going to talk about a few things. National Park Rescue. We talk about your career. We're going to listen to your career's advice as well and hear about all the stuff you've been up to. But let's start by talking about National Park Rescue. As you just said, you're Director of Conservation at National Park Rescue. It's an organisation which you can tell us a bit more about. It's really seeking to tackle the issue of poaching in sub-Saharan African national parks, which are failing, particularly looking at elephants, rhinos, and lions, but other species too, I'm sure. Let's talk about poaching. Okay, so give us a little bit of an idea of the scale of poaching, the issues it causes. Just set the scene for us. Like, what is poaching? Why should anyone even care about it?
Yeah, so great question. I think to start with the basics, poaching is any form of the illegal killing of wildlife. So that could be in the US, shooting a black bear. If you have a license for a black bear and you shoot two, you've poached one of them. So you can legally kill lots of animals. Poaching is the illegal killing of animals. In Africa, people tend to think about poaching as being going after charismatic species such as elephants and rhinos, pangolins and lions that have got body parts that are incredibly valuable to people. But poaching is actually a massive spectrum of illegal killing, from that top end where you're killing a rhino aiming to get about $60,000 a kilo for its horn, right the way down to people that are snaring bush rats for the family pot and everything in between. So poaching is simply the illegal killing of wildlife. It's insidious at all levels. Obviously, the killing of highly charismatic species such as the ones I described is bad news because they're sliding towards extinction. It's totally unsustainable and it's driven by greed. But actually the killing of bushmeat, even if it's not driven by greed and it's just driven by necessity, is just insidious. We've heard of the empty forest syndrome or the silent forest syndrome. It's already afflicting large parts of Southeast Asia because they've already been poached to oblivion. So you spend time in a forest in Southeast Asia and you're lucky to hear anything. Parts of Africa are going that way as well. And so National Park Rescue is really set up to try and work with national parks and other protected areas that cannot cope with the poaching crisis for one reason or another. That might be because they're under too much pressure. It might be because they've got a lack of resources. It might be because of poor governance or whatever. It's our remit is to try and identify national parks that can't cope with poaching and then to try and help them cope and then thrive. And that can be bushmeat poaching or commercial poaching or anything along the spectrum in between.
Got you. That is a brilliant answer. Thank you. Yeah, really clear. So that's the remit. That's what you're looking to tackle in the kind of region you're tackling within. Where the hell do you start? You know, you've got sub-Saharan Africa to go at. I have no idea how many national parks are in it, but presumably quite a few. How
Yeah.
you, yeah, go on. Where do you start, or where did you start? How did you choose, where you're looking to sort of focus your efforts?
So we wanted to be at least partially scientific about it, as opposed to just kind of like putting a pin in a map. And to begin with, we decided we would use elephants as our metric for parks that are failing or succeeding. There's a few reasons to do that. Elephants are really charismatic and really large, which means lots of people are studying them. So whatever's happening to the population, be it growing, stable, or declining, people tend to know with elephants. And then because, of course, they have tusks, which are made of ivory, which are valuable, they're also a really good indicator of poaching levels. So if elephants are dropping off a cliff in a national park, it's a pretty strong indicator that that national park is struggling to cope with all kinds of other poaching as well. And then, of course, elephants are highly charismatic and people want to donate to protect them. So just from a purely commercial perspective, it was a useful thing for us to use elephants as a metric for our own work. In Africa, or sub-Saharan Africa, elephants currently live or cling on in about 37 countries. Kind of varies slightly whether or not they like wander over the border into Togo, but there's basically 37 countries that have elephants. In those 37 countries, there's something in the region of 235 protected areas, so national parks, and then other areas that are protected by government that have elephants. And of those, most have got some kind of information as what's happening to the elephant population, published periodically by the African Elephant Specialist Group of the IUCN. So my job as resident nerd in the organization was to go through those reports and try and identify those trends. Now, we could have looked anywhere in Africa, and the places in Africa at the moment that are suffering the worst losses in elephants are Central Africa, of forest elephants. But we actually chose to focus our attention on a different region. So half of Africa's remaining elephants are in the area around the Zambezi River, called the KAZA, the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area. It's where 5 countries meet. So Namibia, Angola, Botswana, Zambia, and Zimbabwe all converge around the Zambezi. And about half of the elephants left in Africa are there. Most of those in Botswana, but a huge number in Zimbabwe and relatively large numbers in those other countries as well. So in terms of having an impact on a landscape scale on elephant conservation, we felt that focusing on the area where there's a large population was going to be the most bang for our buck. So again, looking at the reports of ongoing poaching, we identified the 2 national parks in that region that are suffering the worst, and that was Siomo and Ngwezi in southwestern Zambia on the border with Angola, and Chisarira in northern Zimbabwe, just south of Lake Kariba. And we visited them both, and for one reason or another, we decided to end up working in Chisarira, where we've been for the past 5 years.
Wow. Okay. So real strategy, actually. So there's some pragmatism within that, but you've actually, looked at it from where do we have data and where can we make an impact, and sort of refined it down fairly rapidly from there. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another criterion that needs to be taken into account, which is the willingness of a place to receive outside help. So lots of places need help. Lots of places are unable to cope with poaching, or they don't have enough resources, but not everywhere is willing to receive help. And like certain countries in particular do not enjoy outside support from NGOs for a massive variety of reasons, and certain protected areas wouldn't want it for a variety of reasons. So we also had to then filter our search by which countries and which protected areas would be willing to receive external support, and that further narrows your search. Like Botswana, for example, Botswana will not have foreign NGOs working inside their national parks on the level that we are, nor will Namibia really. But Malawi, Zambia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe now have got a much more open attitude to high levels of NGO support inside their protected area network.
And how do you go about approaching a national park and saying we'd like to support you in managing and running and helping it to be thrive? Like literally, where do you go? Do you knock at the gates of the park? Do you go to the local government office? Do you go to head office in the capital? Like, what's been your approach? Like in a nutshell, kind of,
All of the above.
Yeah,
so
okay.
country to country, it varies what the protocol is, and it's always worthwhile spending a bit of time in any country to understand how things should be done. Because if you think that country X does things in a certain way, and you go to country Y and try and do it in the same way, you're going to put people's noses out of joint. So we learned that for those two countries that we first started focusing on, which was Malawi and then Zimbabwe, they have very different approaches. So in Malawi, it's a top-down. In Zimbabwe, it was bottom-up. So Zimbabwe is the example I know best because I was there, and we literally drove to the national park. We went in. We said, "Listen, we would like to have a look around, and we'd like to support you." And we spent 4 days there, getting under the skin of the project, getting under the skin of the national park, and what made it tick. And then we built a strong case for how we could help improve the situation in that park. And then we took it to government, but with the support of the local warden, for want of a better word. It's called the area manager in Zimbabwe. Other places you want to start at top government level and then go down. Mozambique, where we're looking at the moment, it's park up. So we're going through a similar process to that which we did in Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and each country will vary.
Yeah, okay, great. So what did you observe then when you got under the skin of the project? 4 days roaming around the park. What did you see? What were the issues that you think the park was facing? And then how did you pull together what you might form like a strategy to help turn it around?
Well, we didn't see any wildlife. So that was a really good indicator that the place is struggling. And what few animals we did see were hightailing it for the horizon at the sight or sound of us or a vehicle coming anywhere near them.
Quite rightly.
Quite rightly so, because they've been absolutely persecuted for the previous few years, and not only by poachers, but by the ranger body was reliant upon wildlife for its rations, and so any time an animal saw a person, it was normally being shot at. So they scarpered. It was actually 18 months of going back and forth to the park before I first saw an elephant inside the park, and
Wow.
and now we see them routinely. And yeah, one of the most gratifying aspects of our work has been seeing the behavior of the animals change. They've gone from being terrified to being pretty relaxed around people and vehicles, which is an astonishing change in only 5 years. But if you stop beating wildlife with a stick, it starts relaxing pretty quickly. So Chisarira National Park in particular, this park in Zimbabwe that we've been working in, between 2008 and 2014, it lost about 2,500 elephants and similar numbers of buffalo. Now, not all of those will have been poached, but elephants are super smart and they don't hang around if a place is really unsafe. Rhinos aren't, so they do hang around, and that's why they go extinct more rapidly. So you can just pick rhinos off one by one, whereas elephants will be like, bugger this, we're off, and they'll scarper. So the estimate from the Great Elephant Census in 2016 was that there was about 425 elephant carcasses within the park, of 2,500 that have been lost. So the rest have just left for one reason or another. And the elephant population was on its knees, buffalo population on its knees, lion population was really down, probably just over 20 in a park of 2,000 square kilometers. Lots of those lions were going into the surrounding communities and predating upon livestock and starting to harass people, so that creates conflict. So the wildlife is really struggling. And then when we look at the infrastructure of the park, when we arrived, the only vehicle they had was on bricks, so that wasn't ideal. Resources were really poor. The kit and equipment was outdated. They hadn't had any updated training for many, many years. Nowhere near enough rangers. The workshop was totally derelict. It had been neglected. It's an isolated and remote national park, 6.5 hours from the nearest international airports. But it's Zimbabwe's third largest national park, and it's got astonishing scenery and wildlife. So you'd have thought that it could have received some attention, but it just hadn't. It had been neglected. And we suggested to the National Park Authority that we might be able to help them put together a program to resuscitate it, working with them as opposed to just separately. And we drew up a really detailed plan looking at 3 pillars principally, which is law enforcement, infrastructure, and community integration. And they're all united. You can't have law enforcement functioning without a good infrastructure. Roads and vehicles, water and power, radio network, all of these things. You need that for law enforcement to work. you can't have good law enforcement unless you've got the communities on side. They are your first line of defense. You can't really integrate the communities without hiring people, and you need them for the law enforcement and the infrastructure. So it's all intertwined. The one pillar that I've left out there is tourism, because firstly, I'm really quite cynical about why on earth it is that the conservation of the world's most beautiful place is based upon the whims of Western tourists wanting to go and see them. That is madness. That these places aren't protected through central government budgets anyway, and they rely upon you and I wanting to go to somewhere and see it. That's nuts. And then secondly, also because Chizarira is 6.5 hours from the nearest airport, it's never going to receive that many tourists. So we had to look at other things. It's always going to be an external funding model for that park until it can generate revenue from carbon and biodiversity. So we put together a project based upon those three principal pillars: law enforcement, infrastructure, and community integration, which meant more than doubling the workforce in the park, massively expanding their law enforcement capacity, massively expanding the infrastructure capacity. And 5 years later, the place is absolutely unrecognizable.
Well, describe that change then. So what's happened? What have you done to make that change? You describe those three pillars, but like just paint a bit of a picture, tell the story of mobilization.
Yeah, so April 2018, take you back, I arrived in the Mucheni village just outside of Chizarira with a semi-trailer full of pipes and water pipes and fuel drums and steel girders and everything. And we carried all of that up to the park in many, many shifts to start rebuilding the infrastructure. We've brought in a total of 7 vehicles used for different things. We've totally rebuilt the workshop that was totally derelict. We've rebuilt all of the rangers' housing. We've redecorated all of the offices. We've created solar power network across the entire national park, so everything's powered by solar. We've redone all of the water, so all of the houses and offices now have water. The campsites have water and good fires. We've regraded or reopened 400 kilometers of roads. That takes some doing. Chizarira is convoluted as well. It's a challenging environment, and that's a lot of work. We've redone the fire management plan because several hundred kilometers of the park get burned every year in fires set by poachers. To do all of that, we've hired, at the moment, we've got 33 staff, 80% of which are hired from villages that live next to the park. 10 of those are explicitly on law enforcement duties, and the remaining 23 are on a remainder of other things that are loosely based on infrastructure or supplying the park. We've introduced digital management systems based on iPads. So all of our manager level people have iPads that sync to each other all the time. So one can send another a task just by flipping it across. And if we're running out of stock of one thing, that appears automatically on the iPad. And then once we've bought that new thing, that gets added again. So we've introduced those systems. We've introduced a really novel reward scheme that we call Sables, named after a beautiful antelope. And Sables are awarded for high performance, and that can be for law enforcement staff or anyone else. And then they can be redeemed for a range of different things. So a Sable is essentially a token, and its base value is $1. But if you redeem your Sables at the end of each month and you just want cash, then it's worth 50 cents. If you want building materials or a building stand where you can build a house, then it's worth $1. If you want medical bills or education, school fees paid, then it's worth $2. So we double the value. And we pay that directly to the service provider, be that a medical clinic or a school or a council if it's a building stand, or a supplier if it's somewhere for bricks or whatever it is. If it's cash, you just get the cash yourself. And what we've realized is that's massively motivational, having the opportunity to earn performance-related bonus above your wage, especially one that then helps feed into your family well-being, be that educational or medical care, or your personal well-being, because a lot of the rangers are pursuing further education as well. So that's been a really motivational thing that we've added. On the law enforcement, for the first 8 months, we had a trainer live in the park with us and do a huge amount of training with the rangers just to bring their standards right back up again on tracking and first aid and all the other things that they need, including firearms work, because the rangers are licensed to carry and use firearms like a police officer. And then we brought in 10 of our own staff, 5 men and 5 women, and we hired most of those locally. All of the women come from villages just around the park. 2 of the guys come from a bit further afield, but 3 come from locally. And they were all trained up to similar kind of standards as the rangers, and they now deploy. To give you an idea of the impact that had, within 1 year of having started the ranger training process, arrests went up by it was 300% in comparison to the previous 5 years. That then dipped off again as overall levels of illegal activity have declined, and then it's picked up just the last year as a kind of knock-on of COVID is my estimate, is my guess. Then when we brought on our own 10 law enforcement staff, and they started to really focus on snaring or de-snaring of the park, snare removals went up by 400% in comparison to the previous 5 years. Dipped a little bit, but stayed still quite high, and they're having a massive impact. Areas that used to just be riddled with snares have been taken out. We lost 2 lines to snares in those first couple of years. Haven't lost any since we brought on that extra focus, that extra resource to that. Overall snaring levels are way down, but still insidious. Elephant poaching is down by 90%, or 94%, to be precise, in comparison to the previous 5 years. The last 5 years, it's down by 94%. Lion numbers are up by an estimated 30%. We haven't really got much in the way of human-lion conflict having anymore, because there's just animals for them to eat, which is nice. And this is one of the most amazing things. Having spent time there when it was empty, driving around there now and just seeing herds of impala and herds of waterbuck. I saw 3 sesame just on my drive out. Seeing elephants for the first time in that national park, it took me 18 months. Hearing lions every single night. I had a leopard by the camp last weekend. All these things, just amazing, seeing that wildlife coming back. And seeing the communities thrilled that we're there, because we are the biggest local employer, and we provide them with their most stable and ongoing trade, because we buy everything from the local places as opposed to further afield. So seeing all of that happening, this micro economy between the park and the communities thriving, seeing the park itself coming up from its absolute nadir, and getting to go back and have a little play myself every now and then is just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
It's awesome. And the word that jumps to mind as I hear about it and reflect on it is just hope. It just shows what a difference even individuals can make in setting up and proactively starting these sorts of movements, and then sort of seeing it through, and how quickly wildlife recovers and bounces back. It's astounding, really, within 5 years. And, what more could that play out into the future? And I guess that does sort of lead into my next question, really, is like, where do you see National Park Rescue going? Like, where do you see the next, 5, 10, 20 years? Like, what's your ambition for scaling up, if that is an ambition? I don't know. And also, related to that funding, how are you funding it now? And what's your ambition for funding in the future if it's detached from tourism? I wrote it down. You said something about cash for carbon and biodiversity payments. And so what are your thoughts around that? There's a whole load of stuff in there. Like, answer what you want.
Great stuff. So our ambitions are twofold. Firstly, it's to consolidate what we've done in Chisarira.
Yep.
One of the criticisms often leveled at conservation NGOs, quite accurately, is that they rock up singing and dancing, and then they bugger off again and just leave somewhere, and it collapses once again. And
sometimes called parachute conservation. You parachute in, parachute out, done.
Precisely. We don't want to do any of that. So what we've been really trying to emphasize to the Zimbabwean government is that we're friends for life, not just for Christmas. So we're currently in the position of negotiating a 20-year deal for that park, and let's hope that comes off. It's with their lawyers. Had an incredibly positive meeting about it earlier in the year with them. So we know we're thinking along the same lines. It's just the devil will be in the detail of that contract. So let's see. But we're looking at 20 years in Chisarira. So that's fabulous. Priority number 1 is consolidating what we've done there, making sure that the jobs that we've created are sustainable for the next 20 years, at least making sure the conservation improvements we've been able to achieve are continued for the next 20 years at least. And then scaling up. What we feel we've hit upon is a model for conservation that's successful, that works, and we're also really proud that we are lean, and we'll get onto that in terms of the money. A lot of lot of conservation organizations are fat and they need to be trimmed. They waste donor money, and there's no more polite way of saying it. They are throwing your donor money down the drain, essentially. Mm-hmm. And we are lean and effective. And so we want to take this model that we have got with our management systems and our reward schemes and our focus on those pillars and our ability to implement directly ourselves as opposed to just donate, and take those to other national parks in other countries, in other areas that need them. And we're looking at one at the moment in Mozambique. We've got options elsewhere, but it's that wrestle between where needs the most help and where's willing to have it, and where can we have the biggest impact. And then also, just at the moment, we're slightly restricted in that we don't have any fluent French speakers, so that just makes Francophone Africa slightly more difficult to work in. Mm-hmm. My Spanish is pretty good, which opens up some of the Lusophone countries that speak Portuguese but tend to understand Spanish, and we've got some really good contacts that could operate in those types of countries. But Francophone Africa is kind of off our radar at the moment, despite the fact that it's a lot of Francophone countries really are in need of support for a variety of reasons. So yeah, we're looking to expand that model and grow. There is another organization called African Parks, who were established by a Dutch billionaire in the year 2000, and they're now in just over 20 national parks 23 years later. You might have come across them. Yeah. And they're looking to be in 30 national parks by 2030. They're doing astonishing things. They're raising astonishing amounts of money, and then they are applying it pretty darn well and having a genuine impact on conservation on the ground in some really challenging areas. And we would like to ape them to an extent. We're not African Parks, we're ourselves, we're National Park Rescue, but we can use them as a fantastic model, at least to an extent, to try and follow and try and have a similar level of impact. Yeah. We've got really good dialogue with their C-suite, and I've spoken to them a lot, and they've been really supportive with everything we've been doing. So yeah, we're very keen to follow in their footsteps, because what Africa really needs is 10 organizations like them, as opposed to one or two, and then a bunch of others that are just fluffing around the edges. So then it comes on to funding. Some of the bigger organizations raise astonishing amounts of money, and I couldn't tell you what they do with it in terms of conservation results. If you go to national parks that have apparently got partnerships with very, very well-known conservation organizations, you wouldn't know where that money's got. They wouldn't have personnel there, or if they do, it would be someone that's part-time. There would be no real long-term impact on it, no real conservation gains. And one of the issues is there's no accountability. If a conservation organization raises money off the back of a photograph of a dead elephant, it will then carry on doing that, even though those elephants are still dying. And what we want to try and do is stop those elephants dying in the first place, and actually be accountable for the money that we raise and therefore we spend. One of our reasons for establishing ourselves was the elephant crisis. In between about 2011 and about 2014, there was something in the region of 30,000 elephants being killed every single year in Africa, which is astonishing, given that there's at the moment only about 400,000 left. There are hundreds of charities that say they're protecting elephants. If they were any good at doing their job, we wouldn't be losing tens of thousands a year. And so we set ourselves up to try and be good at doing their job, basically. To begin with, we were established by some high net worth individuals, and then obviously their whims change with the wind, as they do. So we've then had some really strong institutional support from organizations like National Geographic and the Lion Recovery Fund and others. And then we're really lucky to do quite a lot of fundraising successfully via just members of the public. So through our website and through targeted advertising on the Meta platforms, we get quite a lot of ongoing donations, which is amazing. Just people donating £3 a month, 10 quid a month, 100 quid a month, 500 quid a month, all those types of things. That really keeps us going. And since we started fundraising via public means, which was at the start of COVID, we've almost, but not quite, de-risked the organization. So now any other fundraising you do on top of that is from your much bigger institutional donors and high net worth. And there are a few big funders out there that are just interested in the type of thing that we're doing. So frontline work, It's not donating, it's implementing.
Mm-hmm.
And we've just got ourselves to be able to get into that league. And that's been a real change over this past, I guess, 12 to 18 months, as the results of our previous 3 to 4 years were becoming clear. Those big institutional funders started to turn and say, actually, no, these guys are worth investing in, because if we want to have bang for our buck in conservation, we need to be investing in teams that are actually effective. And so we've just started to get that level of support. And we know that if we get this 20-year agreement, we've got over 800 grand a year guaranteed by one of these big funders, which doubles the amount that we're spending in that park already. Means we can have a massive impact, and that's without doing any further fundraising outside of that. And then when it comes to carbon and biodiversity finance, for me, payments for ecosystem services is where conservation finance has to go. It simply has to. And I mean that is existentially, we need to start paying for this, because otherwise as a species we are stuffed. We have to protect these environments, and the way to protect them is through paying the people that live next to them to keep them intact, encouraging people to see the price of something when it's alive as opposed to just the price when it's dead. So an easy way of looking at that is we know the value of a tree. A tree creates oxygen that we're breathing, creates fruits or nuts that we eat, it mitigates floods, it provides habitat for the insects that we need for 33% of our agriculture, which is based on pollination, all of these other things that a tree does. But it only has a price when it's commodified as timber or pulp. What we need to do is make sure these things have a price when they're still alive. And that might be jarring to some people, but they need to get over themselves and realize that we need this. And this is now starting to filter in to your big investors. People like BlackRock are starting to realize that actually, no, this is where we need to go. And I think the Rubicon has definitely been crossed, in that businesses are now going to start investing in being regenerative as well as just sustainable. But it's going to take a very, very long time. And the bridge that they're using at the moment is credits. Credits are not a panacea, and they're not the end point, but they're part of the way we need. One of the stepping stones along the way we need to get to the point where central government and, to be honest, market economies are financing conservation. That's still way down the line unless you're in Costa Rica. Everywhere else is just doing credits, which is better than nothing. So let's celebrate it and embrace it while we can, while we develop a completely new way of running our economies, which is what we actually need. And so rich countries, Norway, Britain, etc., paying poorer countries to seek low carbon development strategies by offsetting their own carbon or their own biodiversity, more importantly than carbon, is, I think, going to be the future of conservation for probably the next 10 to 20 years, until we've got conservation built into global economies at the start, global budgets from the very beginning. That's Gupta report style, but that's still a very long way away from happening. So up until that point, we need to have credits. Carbon credits are pretty well established, but there's some massive flaws. And one of the biggest flaws is that you can get carbon credits for a standard Norwegian Sitka spruce, which is a green desert. Whereas what we really need to be doing is looking at the much more holistic nature of biodiversity in general, and the massive impact that the complexity of biodiversity has. It's the complexity of ecosystems that generates the services at their best. It's not just a single thing. You cannot replace the complexity of an old growth forest with a load of eucalyptus or a load of Sitka spruce. It just cannot be done. We miss out on so many services just by focusing on carbon, whereas really we need to be focusing much more holistically. And again, the discourse around this is shifting in this past year, that biodiversity has been mentioned almost as often as carbon, and that's only going in one direction.
Yeah, and you articulate it so well and so clearly as well, like, where the state of play is and where we need to go. And I think you're the first person on the podcast to say it as clearly as you did, in terms of of conservation organizations wasting money. That's not been said before on this podcast, and it feels the truth. Actually, I'm with you on that. I think, I'm not pointing any fingers in any directions, but I think, yeah, what would be a really interesting metric to develop would be ex-members of staff of conservation organizations, how many support them as donors into the future, and just to know how effective their insight has been on their employers. Because I think, some are better than others. It'd be really lovely to get a metric of impact from a donor perspective. Anyway, I am super conscious of time and really thankful for your time, and also the audience. We've got a few people listening in, which we'll open up to in a little while and ask questions of you guys as well. So thanks for being present. I'd like to kind of shift the conversation slightly, crunch gears, and move more into you, Niall, and your career to date, pre-National Park Rescue, because I know you've done and continue to do an awful lot of different stuff. When you look back at your career so far, we're about a similar age. What have been your kind of key moments? What have been the kind of stepping stones that you realize, they've all been really important in leading to where I am right now?
Yeah, good question. So there's obviously a few. Early age is just making that decision to do science at school. Mm-hmm. And that was really natural for me because, my family, they're all scientists. They're all, and explicitly, they're all biologists. So it was just a natural thing for me to want to be a biologist. And therefore that kind of dictated what GCSEs and A-levels I took and what degree I did, which was zoology. And so those little things were important. Then a hugely formative experience for me was before I went to university. I spent a year away. In the first 4.5 months of that, I spent volunteering for the Mauritius Wildlife Foundation, which has actually been a bit of a bottleneck for conservationists.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So spending that, it was in 2000. I was the only youngster. Everyone else was a grad. I was not yet. I hadn't been to university yet. I just finished my A-levels. And you're working on an island that really, rather famously, no longer has any dodos. It has about 1% of native forest left. It has 9 endemic species of birds, 3 of which have been perilously close to extinction. There have been 5 Mauritius kestrels, 7 Mauritius echo parakeets, and under 30 pink pigeons, all of which are now safe, brought back from the brink of extinction by one man, Dr. Carl Jones, and his army of young volunteers, of which I found myself a part. And it was by spending time with Carl that I realized the impact that we as individuals can have on the world around us. And that was incredibly formative, realizing that actually, if you are determined, charismatic, and forceful enough in what you're trying to do, you can have a massive impact. There are species on Earth only here because of that man. And that's pretty amazing. And it was wonderful being a really small part of that during the time that I spent in Mauritius. It was also really formative because I spent a lot of really quality time with however many other 20 or so other volunteers, all of whom were just that little bit further down their conservation career than I was because they'd all graduated. And that kind of gave me some really useful way markers as well, and just points to follow. A big part of that was realizing that doing your own thing sets you apart a little bit. So there's a huge body of really talented, really intelligent, very, very experienced young biologists out there. And if you want to be set apart in any way, it's very difficult. And I think what set me apart in that early career was then going on to organize my own expedition. And so partway through the second year of my degree, with funding from the Royal Geographical Society and a few other places, I organized an expedition to Bolivia to go and study giant otters, a 6-foot-long otter. And what we were trying to do was to determine whether or not they were quite as close to extinction as everyone thought. They were formally critically endangered. And part of the research that we did contributed to downlisting them to endangered, because we realised actually there are quite a lot. We just haven't been looking hard enough. So we went to a couple of places that people weren't really looking and figured that out. So that was really, really important. Putting together a team of 4 of us from 2 universities, raising the funds, going out and doing this was vital, I think, for my personal development. And then also gave me that kind of CV boost that was really useful when I then came to apply for further positions, because people look at your CV and like, oh, well, he's organised this himself, therefore he can't be completely incompetent. And that was quite a useful thing.
Just partially.
Yeah, at least some semblance of competence. A few other things along the way were then quite important. Bizarrely, a photograph had a really big impact on my career. There's a photograph you may have seen of me and 3 other people holding a whopping great anaconda.
Yep.
5.5 meters long, or a little bit longer than that. And that photograph helped trigger a television career, which has been incredibly enjoyable, and something of which I'm actually quite proud. I'm more proud of my conservation work, but I shouldn't neglect the fact that the programs I've made have been seen in over 90 countries, and that I do get emails in my inbox from children across the world that have chosen to do biology because they've enjoyed that programming, and that's wonderful to see that someone that would have been a banker is now going to be a biologist. We need more of them, and I love receiving those types of correspondence, and that might not have happened had that photograph of us holding the anaconda not been taken. So remarkable how something as fleeting and almost frivolous as a photograph can have such an impact on your career. But I genuinely don't know if I'd have made that break into the television world if it wasn't for that picture. Genuinely.
Well, it's worth a quick Google. Anyone, Niall McCann anaconda would probably get it quite quickly. Yeah. And if anyone wants to watch Biggest and Baddest, you can still find it online. Can't you? Some great episodes there. Yeah. So I am conscious of time. I want to talk forever, but I want to respect also the time you kind of put to one side for us. Careers advice. You've shared a little bit about your career, and there's so much more to tell. I don't think we've got time to dig into all of it. But what advice would you give someone who's listening? There might be a student at university, there might be at school, or there might be a job seeker out looking for jobs right now, or even a career switch, as someone working unrelated, looking to switch in. Pick whatever you want, whichever audience you want, what do you think are the really cool things? If you want to work in wildlife conservation, these are the things I think you need to focus on. This is what's going to help move your needle. One thing that, listening and reflecting on the conversation we've had now and knowing you personally, is you make things happen for yourself. That seems to be an important thing for you. You've not sat back, you've created things. You've created National Park Rescue. You've created the expeditions that you run the places. A lot of that stuff seems important, but what other things might you want to share with people?
I think the big thing is there's no better time to get into conservation than now, for a multitude of reasons. The green economy is growing faster than the non-green economy. There's no greater need for conservationists than now. It's never too late to be a conservationist, and even if that means now you're doing a degree in biology and actually you need to spend a bit of time doing something else and then come back, that's fine too. It's never too late. We always need more biologists and we always need fewer bankers. So that career will always be there. I think what's vital is to find the area that really motivates you. I thought I was probably going to end up being a sandal-wearing professor working on tapirs for the rest of my life. But I discovered that wasn't for me. What I needed to be doing was this frontline work. And that was not necessarily obvious when I started out. So being open to change, I think, is really important. And saying yes to opportunities. If an opportunity arises, say yes, because you'll always regret not doing something more than you'll regret having done something. And even if that ends up with you being really rather busy because you say yes to 10 things, you'd rather be busy than idle. And one of those 10 things might become the one thing that you most want to do in your life. So saying yes to opportunities, I think, is vital. We absolutely must be focusing on protecting and preserving wildlife. But in order to do that, we also need really good data. So I have left frontline research because I'm not very good at stats, and because I felt that my energies were better employed elsewhere. But for some people, the best use of their skills, their talents, their energies is on that academic side of things, 100%. So it's finding what you're good at and what you're passionate at. I'm not very good at stats, and I'm more passionate about conservation. So I found my way into what I did. So yeah, I think the last thing on that is, don't imagine that a career is a straight line, even if it looks like it from afar. My career has got loads of twists and turns and dead ends and about turns and reverses and wiggles, and then finally you end up here. And looking back, it might look like a straight line, but looking forward, it never looked that way. There's so many different things you could do, and how on earth am I going to make any of these happen? But just keep on trying, keep on going for it, and yeah, if you're passionate about something, you'll make it happen.
That's brilliant advice, and probably a good point to start wrapping up the podcast on too. So yeah, no, as I said at the beginning, I've been wanting to get on the podcast for years, so it's great to have this time. Thank you for jumping on, sharing your advice, sharing your story so far, and who knows where your squiggly career might take you from here as well. So yeah, we'll keep watching with great interest. People want to find out a bit more about you, and particularly National Park Rescue, and if anyone wants to support and donate for your amazing charity, like where should we send them?
Nationalparkrescue.org is a great place to start, and we're on all the regular social media channels as well. And yeah, so am I. I recently started Instagram. I don't really have a clue what I'm doing, but I'm on there as Dr Niall McCann, and I'm on Twitter as well.
Oh, you'll be on Threads before you know it too.
I have no idea what these things are. I'm such a Luddite.
Oh, great. Well, we encourage everyone to kind of get in touch, to follow and support. Yeah, thank you so much, Niall. So we're going to stay on now. We've got some people in the audience who are going to jump in and ask questions, but thanks also again for jumping on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to speak to you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career-boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy, or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.